But what's critically important this time is that the two sides find a way, a roadmap.
To agree on some definitions in terms of denuclearization and what it covers.
What he needs to do is to deliver a nuclear deal that goes beyond the agreed framework, the three six-party talk.
Chairman Kim Jongun visited factories in cities bordering China.
Yeah, and this just shows that he is pursuing his Pyeongjin line, the dual track of nuclear and economic development.
I don't think we're looking at a single moment when we're going to know whether North Korea plans to complete the process of denuclearization.
From the Voice of America, this is Washington Talk.
Hello and welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eun Cho. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo visits North Korea to engage in first high-level talks since the Singapore summit 3 weeks ago. And Chairman Kim Jong-un tours factories near the border with China. Is he looking toward a different, brighter future for the people of North Korea? My guest today, Mr. Frank Januzzi, president of the Mansfield Foundation and former advisor to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Also joining us today, Ms. Do-yeon Kim, visiting senior fellow at the Korean Peninsula Future Forum and a columnist with the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. Ms. Kim was previously with Carnegie Endowment. Good to see you.
Thanks for having us.
Hi, Mike Pompeo is visiting Pyongyang for the third time, and how significant is this trip in the overall denuclearization process, if any one of you can start us off?
So this is the first real negotiations after the Singapore summit. So I would call this round two. The Singapore summit was round one, but this is really where we can either see cracks in the process or maybe a normal negotiating process where you have some ups and downs, some challenges here and there, which is normal. But what's critically important this time is that the two sides find a way, a roadmap, agree on a roadmap of denuclearization, as well as corresponding concessions that the U.S. is willing to provide in return for every step. But I think the most essential part at a minimum is that the two sides agree on the definition of denuclearization, its scope, and the conditions.
I think Do-yeon makes a good point. You know, there's a lot of skepticism in Washington, D.C. in particular, that has met the Singapore summit. And it's important for the two sides to get some momentum into this process. They need to agree on some definitions in terms of denuclearization and what it covers. And they need to agree some first steps, some concrete first steps. Not just issues that go to the atmospherics, like the remains of MIA, but something that goes to the specific of North Korea's nuclear capabilities. I'd love to see them come out of this meeting with an agreement for some date certain by which time inspectors might be allowed into North Korea to verify a suspension of operation at Yongbyon. I know there's also a lot of talk about some sort of a declaration of nuclear-related facilities that the North needs to produce. I think that also would be a really meaningful first step.
Right before Secretary Pompeo's trip to Pyongyang, intelligence reports were leaked, and the reports talked of increased uranium secret production, increased expansion of a missile plant, and also seeking to hide nuclear weapons from the United States. So with these latest findings and the disclosure, would this put pressure on North Korea to show more sincerity on denuclearization?
You know, honestly, I'm not sure if this would actually put pressure on North Korea, because technically there's nothing in the Singapore declaration or joint statement that prohibits North Korea from conducting nuclear business as usual. Now, of course, the other side of the technical points is they shouldn't be doing these activities anyway because they are banned by UN Security Council resolutions. But if you look at the Singapore declaration itself, the North did not commit to any first steps. So there's nothing in place that prohibits it from doing this.
Yeah, I think Duyun again makes a really excellent point. That the fact is that North Korea did not make any concrete promises to stop any bad behavior. What they promised to do was to work toward denuclearization. And the normal conduct of negotiations, right up until the point when you stop doing bad things to each other, you maximize your leverage, you maximize your position. The U.S. hasn't lifted sanctions. The North Koreans aren't going to stop producing fissile material until such time as there is an agreed roadmap of reciprocal step-by-step actions by the two parties. What I find a little bit troubling is just that, for the North Koreans, to have made a pledge to denuclearize eventually, to be sort of maximizing their stockpiles of fissile material or continuing their missile development right up until the time when the U.S. is prepared to offer up some gesture. I mean, it basically speaks to how difficult this process is going to be. The North Koreans are not going to cede any ground unilaterally.
Right, and that's why it's critically important that Secretary Pompeo, it's important, but it's also, he carries the heaviest burden now of delivering the historic nuclear deal that President Trump did not deliver. And we actually did not expect President Trump to deliver a nuclear deal, typical nuclear deal. But so the burden is on Secretary Pompeo, and what he needs to do is to deliver a nuclear deal that goes beyond the agreed framework, the three six-party talks agreements, and the Iran deal, because the Trump administration has basically said the Iran deal was not good enough. And so the administration has set the bar very high for itself, and Pompeo needs to deliver.
Right, switching topics, North Korean economy will go through major changes after the country gives up its nuclear weapons, and Chairman Kim Jong-un visited factories in cities bordering China. Is this a sign that he wants foreign investment coming into his country?
Yoon Chung, I think the North Korean economy is already undergoing major changes. I think that the decision by Kim Jong-un to pursue denuclearization really lags behind the steps that he has already taken to begin market reforms, to begin to transfer decision-making authority from the state to factory managers, to allow farmers to keep a larger share of their production, and to court foreign investment and trade. All of these things have been going on for the last several years under Kim Jong-un, and they now appear to be accelerating. And you can see in his New Year's address, and you can see in Kim Jong-un's behavior over the course of this year, that he's attaching greater and greater significance to economic performance. Even the much celebrated parade in Pyongyang, where they rolled out a lot of missiles last year, they also rolled out a lot of industrial goods and tractors and farm equipment. Kim Jong-un wants his country to be successful economically, and I think that's where the priority is going to be for the remaining years, looking out several years of his administration.
Yeah, and this just shows that he is pursuing his Pyeongjin line, the dual track of nuclear and economic development, in full force. But I think we need to remember that even though this year it seems like a lot of the focus is on economics, Pyeongjin is not over.
It's not?
It's not. I would argue it's not, because in Kim Jong-un's New Year's Day address, he ordered his people to mass produce nuclear warheads and ballistic missiles, and that's the work plan for this year. And so it's mass production. It may not be testing, because the North is claiming they don't need to test their weapons anymore. They can just mass produce them. So we need to remember that that the nuclear component is not entirely dead.
The factories that Chairman Kim visited, the Siniju city was designated Special Economic Zone in 2002. And Shindo County includes Hwanggeunpyeong Island, which was named Free Trade Area with China in 2011. So does this show, and he visited these areas after meeting with President Xi Jinping for the third time. So does it show that he wants to pursue a free economic zone with China again?
I think it just shows that he really wants his country to be a prosperous country. We hear that word prosperous a lot, prosperity a lot now. And so it basically shows that he also is pretty much open for business too. He might be looking to attract foreign investment, and for now foreign might just be Chinese for now. But in the long run, he might be looking for to diversify his investment base as well. But it also shows that Kim Jong-un wants his country to be a normal country too, and to be a modern country.
And the factories that he visited are textile factory and a cosmetics factory and chemical fiber mill, all light industry. So is light industry a good area for North Korea to start receiving foreign investment and do joint ventures?
Well, you know, North Korea has quietly become the #1 exporter of textiles to China. China imports more clothing from North Korea than they do from any other country. And a lot of it is the result of Chinese investment in North Korea, in small textile mills, in sewing assembly plants where fabrics from China are sewn together by North Korean workers and then re-exported to China. This emphasis on light industry has been in the 5-year plans and the New Year's addresses of Kim Jong-un, also even his father. It's sort of a logical place for North Korea to move if you're trying to sort of dismantle large state-owned enterprises that are unproductive and move people into productive workforce activities that can earn a profit. So I think it makes a lot of sense for them economically. It's where they're going to go. In terms of China, I agree that, you know, for now, China is sort of the only game in town, right? I mean, in terms of the trade and investment. But I'm confident that Kim Jong-un would want and prefer a balance. It's one of the reasons why he's reaching out to the South, why he's hosted Lavrov from Russia, why he's met with Kim Jong-un, has met with Donald Trump. You know, he's seeking balance so that he's not overly dependent on any one market or any one potential investor.
The problem with textiles, though, is that they are banned by a UN Security Council resolution. And so I think we'll see with the whole talk about peace, the peace process, and especially South Korean President Moon Jae-in's peace agenda, I think we'll see some countries torn between wanting to go in and cooperate, do some economic cooperation, build some business ties on the one hand. But on the other hand, we'll see some countries hesitant because there are sanctions still in place, because they might see it to be still politically taboo to conduct business with North Korea. And so it's going to be a very interesting road ahead to see how other countries react to the movements on the ground on the peninsula.
My last question. President Trump said that he thinks Kim Jong-un sees a different future for his country. Do you see any signs that Kim Jong-un is willing to give up his weapon and give a better life to his people?
Yeah, so far we don't see concrete evidence or signs. But at the same time, I mean, this is a rare opportunity to test Kim Jong-un himself. He has put himself into this process, so the onus is on him.
I don't think we're looking at a single moment when we're going to know whether North Korea plans to complete the process of denuclearization. I think we're looking at a long, difficult, step-by-step decision-making process.
Yeah, and that's a really important point because the North doesn't see denuclearization in a vacuum. So it's part of a package. It's part of the normalization of relations. It's part of the peace regime. And so like Frank said, it's not going to just be one target and one objective.
Well, we'll end this conversation here and watch video for our next topic. South and North Korea holds first basketball friendly in 15 years amid warming of relations. Chairman Kim, who's a basketball fan, was not spotted in the crowd. Now, we haven't seen any sports exchanges between the two Koreas in many, many years. The fact that they're having this friendly, does it show that there has been significant improvement in their ties?
I think it shows that they're trying to improve their ties. with people-to-people exchanges in areas that are less sensitive in the current political climate. But really, sports diplomacy has its limits, and it can only go so far in actually bringing about sincere or genuine improvement in relations unless there's full support from the top leadership on both sides.
But I think what's critical about sports diplomacy in this situation is that it begins to humanize the North Korean people. And I think that process also diminishes the risk of conflict. I think that nations that compete peacefully with each other in sports, that exchange symphony visits and family visits, have a tougher time demonizing and ginning up a kind of a war hysteria. And remember, we're only 6 or 7 months out from a time when the whole world was concerned that the Korean Peninsula might in fact be headed toward conflict. So I think it's very encouraging to see this kind of peaceful competition and on common ground. The both nations can have an appreciation for basketball, whether Kim Jong-un shows up or not. I think it's a good sign.
Yeah, you just mentioned Kim Jong-un didn't show up, and he's the one who wanted to have basketball friendly rather than soccer friendly. What does this say about how he treats the South Korean guests in his country? Is South Korea too accommodating? Is this the overall dynamics between the two Koreas currently?
I wouldn't read too much into it. Of course, we don't know exactly what Kim Jong-un is thinking, but I'd be cautious to speculate. What does this mean? Does he not value South Korea and its participation? He just might have had other plans.
I wouldn't read too much into his absence, but I think that the more important fundamental is that if South Korea wants to improve relations with North Korea, then these kinds of exchanges make sense. And we shouldn't worry about who is courting who. The two sides, if they're moving toward each other, that's encouraging. I do think it's really important, however, that in every interaction between the South and the North, the South should try to make this a normal interaction.
Yeah, and we'll see where Kim Jong-un's thinking really is on this. If the North participates in other cross-border exchanges, then that's a telling sign. But so far, I think they will. I think the two Koreas, or the two Korean leaders especially, they have a vested interest in this process that we're seeing between the two Koreas.
Yeah, just briefly before we go, the latest event was held in Pyongyang. K-pop concert was held in Pyongyang in April. It seems all the exchanges, cultural exchanges, are all targeting the elites in Pyongyang. So what are your thoughts about this?
Well, North Korea, if change is going to come to North Korean attitudes, it's going to be top-down, I think. I think the Pyongyang elite are the people who already are the best informed about the world in North Korea, but they still have huge gaps in their understanding and knowledge. So I think it's really good for South Korea to cultivate friendships and awareness in the North among the elite about the fact that North Korea has been isolated not so much by the world, but by their own actions. And that they're behind economically, again, not because of economic pressure and sanctions, but really because of mismanagement and gross negligence on the part of the North Korean leadership. So this cultivation of the North Korean elite, I think, should continue. And hopefully, as they become more well-informed and maybe better, sort of more friendly in their attitude toward the South and the outside world, they may encourage the process of transformation in the North, a kind of a peaceful evolution, if you will. I hate to use that term because I know it has negative sort of overtones in the North, but a peaceful change that is led by the North Korean people themselves.
We'll wrap this discussion here and move on to our next segment. Now, time for the photo moment, a time to look at an interesting North Korea picture. The photo today is a mass ceremony of North Korea's Korean Children's Union, marking its 72nd anniversary. The event was held last month at Kumsusan Palace of the Sun in Pyongyang, which is mausoleum for Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. This is a political organization for children aged 7 to 13 who pledge their allegiance to the Kim family. Frank, what's your reaction?
Well, I guess that as far as modernization has gone, we should remember that North Korea is a land of mass mobilization and mass propaganda, and loyalty to the Kim family comes first, and that hasn't changed.
Yeah, I agree with Frank 100%. This is just indicative of the way the North operates, the way the North extracts or obligates allegiance and loyalties to the Kim dynasty and the Kim leader.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Tuyeon, Frank, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
감사합니다.
Thank you. And this was Washington Talk from the Voice of America, and I'm Eunjung Cho. Join us again next week for more analysis on North Korea.